Welcome and thank you for joining us. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. As we approach midlife, many of us are finding ways that we can actually balance our lifestyles to be able to get that kind of harmony and bliss that we've always tried to achieve as we were growing up. On the program today, we're going to be talking about one of them particular kinds of emotions that many of us try to manage on a day-to-day business. We find ourselves out there in traffic, for instance, running late for an appointment and, of course, hitting every single red light on the way there because we are running late. We find this seething, boiling thing that begins to come up and swell within us. Pretty soon, you know, somebody's cutting us off in traffic and we've lost our minds and we're about ready to go and just pound the windshield out and make sure that we can find a way to release the seething that's boiling within inside of us. What is anger exactly? Is this one of those emotional things that kind of charges up within inside of ourselves? Is it a mental condition? Is it really all in the mind? Joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is someone who's spent more than 30 years as a nutritional therapist. She's also a holistic wellness expert and a very dynamic and exciting speaker who's been on more than 5,000 television and radio shows as well. She also tries to overcome the challenges of malnutrition, HIV, AIDS, and diabetes, and also talks about the side effects of those particular things with the combination of drugs and poverty using Nutritional as well as Morning Vita. Joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is the author of the book, The Anger Cure. It's a step-by-step program to reduce anger, rage, negativity, violence, and depression in your life. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Ms. Kathleen O'Bannon. Kathleen, thank you for joining us here on the program today.
Well, hello. It's good to be there. I'm happy to talk to you again. 30 years, I've been doing it way more than that.
Well, that's why I said more than 30 years.
I know. Well, and
that was according to your website. I know when we talked last, it was more than 40 years.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny too because what happens is a lot of people can't even believe I'm over 30 or over 40 when they see me. So a lot of people get really shocked, and that's a possibility when you eat the right foods at the right time.
Mm-hmm. Now, what's really fascinating about The Anger Cure is I'm sure that most people, when they see this book on the shelf and they think, well, this would be interesting. So what is it, a step-by-step guide that says, I need to exercise a lot more or at least a little more, do yoga, perhaps sit and do breathing meditation. But it's really a lot more than that. As you go through, you realize that anger is really more than just a state of mind.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I do look at the state of mind of it all, but basically what happens is all parts of your body work from blood sugar. Blood sugar comes from food. If you don't eat, your body won't work. Your heart won't work, and that's often how a lot of people get heart attacks. They try to make their heart work or do hard work without having eaten, and so there's no fuel to run it. If you can't think, especially in the morning, it means you don't have fuel in your brain. So instead of jacking yourself up or hyping yourself up with something like caffeine or sugar or whatever, if you eat real food, you'll be able to think better in the morning.
Now, it seems that there are always approaches when it comes to, let's just call it for right now, for the sake of argument, a psychological condition of something like anger. So the typical approach, especially here in America, is there's a symptom, we're going to patch it up with a problem. And we seem to have a nation of people who are managing things such as anger and depression, as you were subtitling here in your book, with drugs. And, well, that doesn't make a problem that's already a problem any better.
No, that's absolutely correct. And it's funny that now we live in a time where the drug people, the pharmaceuticals, the doctors, and so forth, they all think that giving you something to cover up the symptoms is what should happen. And it's quick and it's easy and maybe it's effective. But wouldn't you just rather fix the problem? If you're having problems with anger it's not so much that you have to subdue yourself or take some kind of brain thing that's a chemical or a tranquilizer. You really have to make sure you don't trigger the anger, which is what I talk about by eating the right foods at the right time in the anger cure.
Now, let's go ahead and start with how anger really starts. And, I can see how getting to a point where, for instance, you realize, geez, you're going to get upset about things, but you really won't get angry. Is there a difference?
Yes. I used to start speaking engagements by saying there's no such thing as stress, and people started laughing at that until I finished and said, stress is what you allow to happen to yourself, and you allow it by having a faulty lifestyle.
Well, how do you argue with something like that?
Yeah, exactly. It's all pretty basic. I mean, so when I used to work in a clinic in the 70s, we didn't have all these drugs for diabetes, for example. It's actually called not so much type 2, which it is, but it's called non-insulin dependent diabetes. Now people use insulin for it. It used to be called adult onset. Now 10-year-olds are getting it. And the difference is we have drugs that people think will fix it. So they don't have to change their faulty lifestyles that are triggering it. They can just take drugs to cover it up and eventually wear themselves out and get all sorts of other diseases that they have drugs for. My goodness, it's just it's a catch, or maybe a catch-22, I guess.
Now, as you were saying earlier, it seems to be managing the pendulum swings of blood sugar by keeping it right where it should be. So, which requires eating, obviously. So let's start there. Now, breakfast. Boy, I'm sure you've probably had a lot of people say, well, that sounds great, but, I noticed that if I have breakfast, that generally the rest of my day really does sort of set an even tone, but it also depends on what you have for breakfast as well.
That's right. And I have a lot of secret tips, and I'm going to tell you one of them right now. The best way to stay healthy is to eat something within the first half hour of getting up in the morning. Not caffeine, not nicotine, not sugar, not carbohydrates. Some sort of protein. Could be a green powdered drink, it could be a boiled egg, it could be a few nuts, piece of cheese, something like that. That will stabilize your blood sugar and set you up for being able to have energy for the entire day. And then every couple of hours you eat a little something more. Mm-hmm. And that gives you the fuel for your body to run efficiently. If you don't do that, your body goes into something called the fight or flight syndrome, which triggers an adrenal cascade, and all that adrenaline's running around in your body, speeding you up, hyping you up. But also what happens is it stops your digestion, and that's how we get acid reflux or GERD, because when people get under stress and go without eating, their digestion stops, so that's the result. Or it could make your heart rate and speed up and your breathing shallow. We actually call that anxiety disorder. Or it could tense up your muscles, making you ready to fight or flight, and we actually call that fibromyalgia, and if it gets really advanced, sometimes it's arthritis. You can see what you can trigger by not eating foods in the morning and by letting your body automatically try to give you the energy you should have gotten from food. But the fight or flight is to save your life. It's not to be something you do every day. It'll wear your body out so fast you won't believe it.
And it's interesting, too, when you think about anger and you approach it from a point of a thought process. There's a lot of truth in that, because that's what it is. It's a thought processing around and around and around and around. And I know that in the morning when I start off my day, what I love to do, how I love to start my day with breakfast is I like making green smoothies. And I'm someone that doesn't have to doctor them up so that they taste sweet or good or anything like that. I just enjoy the state of foods as they are. When I tend to cook, for instance, I don't usually use a whole lot of seasonings to, again, doctor the flavors. It seems that we've become sort of a nation that tends to rely on these ways of covering up the flavor of food so that way we can tolerate it, and that takes us to probably one of the number one culprits that's really underlying and causing maybe the anger problem in the first place, and that's sugar.
Oh, please. Sugar and high fructose corn syrup
Ugh.
and aspartame, they all can throw your body totally out of balance and cause a problem. And you can see that in North America, we have been trained over the years to want things that are sweet, salty, and fatty. And I'll give you an example. 30 or 40 years ago, a recipe for a dozen medium-sized muffins that used a cup and a half of flour took 2 or 3 tablespoons of sugar. Now that same recipe takes a cup and a half of sugar. That's how much our tastes have been trained to want more sugar.
Right. You even talked about, for instance, in the book how, I don't know if it was you, but about someone who was given water and corn syrup for breakfast, and I thought, ugh.
Oh, yeah. Oh, no. Well, and exactly, and that's actually not what they give them for breakfast. That's what they used to feed babies. Before we had formulas for babies, there was no other formula. And so many doctors told, this is in the 30s and 40s or so, they told the mothers to give the baby corn syrup and water as their first food.
Really?
Yes.
Now, why would they do something as ridiculous as that?
Sugar. Well, and we don't know. Hopefully they don't do it anymore. But it does. I guess, would it matter if they give them a formula that's loaded with sugar or if they give them corn syrup and water? I don't know. It's still the same kind of thing that will throw them off and make them want more and set them up for type 2 diabetes and all kinds of health problems.
Now, the other thing, too, that we have to also look at, that, again, because you begin to see as you go through the anger cure, that it's not just a state of mind, but it's really a cause, or let's say an effect of the cause of a lot of things on a biophysical level.
Oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's funny because food equals energy, no food equals no energy. That's all you need to remember. Mm-hmm. But there's also something we like to talk about, and it's called stinkin' thinking. So a lot of people, their thinking goes bad because they don't have enough fuel in their brain to think properly. And in many cases, this is what leads to people having depression. Now, there's a kind of a line between when you really have severe depression and when you have depression that's brought on by a faulty lifestyle. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of times people talk themselves into being sick because their brains don't get the right fuel to function.
Now, you also outline when it comes to nutrition, foods that you avoid. You categorize foods and what families they come from, mm-hmm. and also, the foods that you really want. And you also talk about vitamins and the kinds of vitamins that are really important, especially in the body. Talk about the B vitamins.
Oh, well, we have not been talking much about B vitamins for many, many years. They were the first kind of health food. And what we used to have was brewer's yeast or nutritional yeast. We still have that. Those are foods with B vitamins in them. And the B vitamins are such that they feed your body. They help with your digestion. They help overcome stress. They can help your body get thinner and give you more energy. But they are heat, water, and light soluble. So if you take some foods with B vitamins or a supplement, you have to take them 3 times a day in order for it to be the most effective.
Now, what are some of the great sources if you decide, well, I'd like to kind of get into my food for a person to get B vitamins?
Well, the most wonderful is nutritional yeast.
Right.
And nutritional yeast is specifically grown to have all of the B vitamins, but it also generally has chromium. And chromium helps to stabilize your blood sugar levels. It's called the glucose tolerance factor. And so if you use nutritional yeast in your shake in the morning, you would be getting loads of B vitamins. B vitamins are in many foods, not so much in fruit, but in a lot of foods. Unfortunately, some of the best places for B vitamins people don't want to eat anymore, like liver.
Yeah, I wasn't much of a fan of liver myself growing up.
Oh, no, I love liver. And actually, I had liver last week. I had organic liver, lightly cooked with onions, and, oh, it was just fabulous. Of course, I cooked it myself. But liver has B vitamins, liver has all of the iron you need, and let me tell you a secret for people over 50. They say that people over 50 who have trouble with thinking and being organized and having their brain function need more B12. Guess what's a really good source of B12? It's liver. And I had this friend who was old, well, probably as old as I am now, but he was old then, and he was having a lot of trouble, and he didn't want to take any pills. So once a week he went and ate liver, and he was totally over all of the old people's lack of thinking problems just by eating liver once a week because he got the B12 that he needed in order to allow his brain to function.
Now, you do list some interesting little scenarios of people, how they, were in particular situations, and it seemed that your remedy was relatively easy when you took a look at what was going on with them and said, well, why don't you go ahead and do this?
Yeah, it is. It's really easy because, once again, food equals energy, no food equals no energy. And so almost everything that goes wrong with people can be directly related to not eating food or not eating food at the right time, or the right food, of course. Mm-hmm. So it's funny, I was doing a seminar at a weekend yoga conference, and they were all sitting around on the floor, and I casually mentioned things like, if you're having trouble sleeping at night, and you go, and this was in the 70s, and you go to your doctor and tell him that, and he gives you a prescription for sleeping pills, run out, because the first thing he should ask you is, how much coffee do you drink? Well, at that point, a man who was an engineer jumped up and started running around the room screaming, that's my problem, that's my problem. Can you imagine an engineer didn't know that drinking coffee could keep him awake at night? But, I was shocked he didn't know, but people have their minds segregated, and they're not paying attention to the kinds of nutritional things that, of course, I love paying attention to. Uh-huh. And so there are lots of things that people can do that are making them sick and making them out of balance, and that could easily be fixed by changing their lifestyle.
And it's interesting. You bring up coffee, and this comes to mind for me. I just found this fascinating, and because it was something I had read just some months ago. But I used to really enjoy drinking coffee. Now, there was a moment in time that I used to guzzle coffee, probably like a lot of people, more cups than you need to throughout the day. It was more like a habit is what it was. And eventually I found myself toning it down to the point where it was eventually where I might have, for instance, a mocha or a cappuccino early in the morning, and then that would be it. I wouldn't, have any more for the rest of the day. Back in the day when I was drinking a lot of coffee, I was also drinking a lot of alcohol as well. And there came a point I decided that I wanted to stop drinking for a while just to feel better. And what had happened is then I began to replace alcohol with eating Snickers candy bars, for instance, and drinking soda pop. And I went, okay, now I've heard this about alcoholics where all of a sudden they go to another compulsive vice, such as, well, I loved Rocky Road ice cream or, milkshakes, whatever the case is. Now, what had happened was eventually, of course, I went back to drinking again, but my coffee habit still stayed the same, and then eventually I just stopped drinking coffee altogether. And I really enjoy coffee, but I found that over time it was very subtle, but I started to really enjoy the way that I felt. Excuse me. Okay, so then I went back and decided to stop drinking again. What was really interesting is at first I began to replace the habit with ginger ale because I thought Coca-Cola was too heavy. And it was always in the evening when I would sit, excuse me, and watch TV and work on a crossword puzzle just to relax. And I realized, okay, now I'm replacing this habit, but I started toning that down and eventually getting to water. And that only took about a week to 2 weeks at the most, to where I would just have a couple of glasses of water in the evening. And I was okay with that. And that's what was interesting was this. I didn't find like the days of old where I'm in the store and, boy, I want to have that candy bar, that sugar craving. Now, this seems like a long story to get to the point, but what I had read is when you drink coffee, you actually begin to crave sugar. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, it's not a big deal. Of course you will. There are so let me say that people who smoke, for example, most of the time people smoke because cigarettes raise your blood sugar level.
Right.
By triggering that adrenal cascade, which is the wrong way to do it. And then when your blood sugar drops, and it doesn't matter whether you've actually had sugar, caffeine, or nicotine, it raises your blood sugar level, then it drops, and when it drops in an hour or two, then you want some other quick fix. And the quick fix could be candy, liquor, tobacco, nicotine, any kind of stimulant like that. Or sugar, of course. And so it doesn't matter whether you substitute orange juice, which I think is sort of evil, with if you replace your alcohol with orange juice, you're doing the same thing metabolically to your body, but you're just not damaging your liver as much because it's not the alcohol. But most of the time, people do those things to raise their blood sugar level. Wouldn't it be easier to just eat small, frequent meals and not have your blood sugar drop so you don't need them? It's true.
And when you think of what all of these things have in common that you just mentioned, sugar, alcohol, cigarettes, is the fact they cause something that you can see now where anger really begins to surface again. It's not of the mind, but it's really biochemical or biophysical, and that is that these items cause inflammation.
Absolutely. That's those are the new buzzwords these days, inflammation. And actually, in the 70s, I worked in a clinic that did, it was a hardening of the arteries clinic, and that's what the doctor used to talk about then. He talked about how when the inside of your arteries become inflamed, it's kind of like having chapped hands. They get all rough, just like you would if you had chapped hands, really bad ones. And then the cholesterol that circulates through your blood like it's supposed to gets hooked on those parts that are the rough parts, and the next thing you know, you got high cholesterol stuck in your body because the inflammation is causing some kind of problem inside your arteries. But it goes on in every part of your body. Every part of your body can have inflammation, from fat, grease, the wrong kind of fat, sugar, and refined carbohydrates, alcohol, caffeine, and pollution. They all cause that.
Now, there you go, folks. Now, take a look at this. So you begin a chain reaction. The first thing you don't do is you decide, I don't have time for breakfast, so what do? You get a quickie on the fly. You grab the new wave muffin, which is predominantly sugar. It's not like the biscuit, as you were talking about earlier, that it used to be for breakfast. And then the next thing you do, and you're grabbing that cup of coffee, as I've just suggested, and I know this from experience, is that it causes a sugar addiction. So you have a lot of that. And then perhaps you're a smoker. Of course, you got to relieve the anxiety of trying to rush off to work because you didn't have the time for breakfast. Then you can see how these things culminate into a lot of inflammation. This causes stress, so that muffin that you ate and perhaps that lunch that you're going to have in the afternoon, well, they don't get properly digested, which brings us to the next level of where anger also comes from, poor digestion. How often do you see that as an experience with people who talk with you about their anger problem, if you will?
95% of people who have a problem of anger.
Boy, did we lead that into a big discussion, didn't we?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's all true. It's so funny that they're so related.
I just wondered if I took that down the right road for you, Kathleen.
Oh, thank you so much. Yes, you did, Daniel. You did. It's so interesting to see that nowadays many young people, not old people over 50. Oh, actually, I think 50-year-olds are young people, so whatever.
Right.
So many of them have no idea that the food that they eat should fuel their body in a positive way. And And I'm horrified that we have so much information. And, of course, you mentioned having a candy bar. A couple of years ago during the Super Bowl, there was an ad for a brand name candy bar where people were, when you're not yourself, you're hungry, you need a candy bar. Hello.
Right.
When you're not yourself, you need carrot sticks, a hard-boiled egg, and some cheese. You don't need a candy bar. You need real food. But, of course, if you have a candy bar, then it'll serve you for an hour or two. Your blood sugar will drop, and you'll want caffeine, nicotine, or another candy bar. So they're trying to make the sales of their candy or coffee or cigarettes go on and on and on and on. It's very sad because when your body starts breaking down from lack of nutrients and the inflammation that are caused, it's very sad. It's really hard to recover once you get broken.
I found that to be such an interesting part in your book when you talk about digestion, because when you take a look at, for instance, the scenario of how you get up, you start your day, and then all of a sudden you're having lunch, is that after lunch you find yourself in a food crash, like all you want to do is just lay down and sleep for the next hour or two.
Dear.
I think, well, wait a minute, if food is energy, then why do I feel so de-energized?
Right. And of course, now here's the problem. If you aren't producing enough digestive enzymes in one way or another because you've gone without eating too long or because you've done the stress throughout the day, then your body tries to digest the food. And while it's working and working and working and working, because it can't do it right away because there's no enzymes to do it, that food that you've just eaten starts to ferment. And the fermentation causes gas, and the gas causes you to burp, and sometimes sour stuff goes right up to the back of your throat because the gas is being let go out of your stomach from the fermentation. Then that can cause you to have constipation, diarrhea. It'll affect your liver, and it's just nasty. However, let me say, and I'm backtracking a tad here, if you don't feel like eating when you get up in the morning, or if you're unorganized in the morning, there's a reason for that. First of all, because you didn't eat something as soon as you got up to stabilize your blood sugar. But second of all, if you eat your big meals late at night or sit around eating ice cream and soft drinks and chips and so on all night watching TV, your blood sugar will drop during the night. And it'll go way lower than usual. And when you wake up, you won't be able to think or get organized, and you certainly won't want to eat breakfast. And so it starts the night before for many people.
Wow, and it's just amazing to think that so within, so without. And I'm remembering a time, Kathleen, and this was many years ago, that I was up and I was sitting one morning, and a quiet voice actually welled up within me. And it simply said this, you treat me as though you hated me. And it was like my body was talking to me.
Oh, how
and
fabulous.
I thought, that was really weird. I mean, really, it was an inner voice. And I thought, you're right. I do treat you like I hate you. We're going to do something about that. But, a lot of people just mindlessly go about their day as though they're programmed. And they just they find themselves in this loop over and over. And then you can see how something so basic as what we're talking about here leads to a point where they feel, well, this is out of my control. I'm not smart enough to manage, deal with, or diagnose this. So I'm going to go to somebody that's smarter than me, somebody that should know about these things. And, then you've got a whole industry that deals with that.
Yeah, that would be me, not your doctor.
What's that?
If you want somebody that's smarter that can help you, you come to a nutritionist, not your doctor.
Not your doctor. But people usually go to the doctor.
I know, and that's the sad part, because most doctors are not trained in nutrition. And even if they were, all they do would be to talk to you about calories and carbohydrates. They would not be speaking to you about the kinds of food that fuel your body. Mm-hmm. That's why I have all those questionnaires in the Anger Cure. So people can diagnose themselves, figure out whether that's their issue or not, and then read what to do about it.
And it's really not that hard either.
No.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's not.
Here's a question for you, Kathleen. Now, because you've been doing this 40-plus years, we'll just say more than 4, we're looking at half a century here. No, and I think that's marvelous because that's such a nice, solid, level of experience when it comes to this. So, folks, she knows what she's talking about. And the reason I wanted to ask that or put that into perspective of you have seen decades of just call them trends. And, this is an industry, diet and nutrition, that I think is just glutton with nothing more than confusion or parroting of what somebody had said before. We're just going to put it in a new package and put it out there. Why do they confuse this so much, something that's so basic and so simple, diet and nutrition?
Well, and it's a really interesting observation because what we're finding is, for example, weight loss. Now,
right.
In the 50s and early 60s, people considered, or even into the 70s, no one would consider a weight loss program that did not include oil. Oil was considered the darling of weight loss. If you didn't eat oil, have some oil with your meal or your shake, you wouldn't even be able to lose weight at all. Then people got afraid of oil. And so then they went no oil at all, and that made people not be full when they ate or feel full, and it also made people all dried out and prune-like, but it made them crave other foods just to try to fill that hole that came with oil. Now we're back to saying, well, oh my goodness, oil is good for you, but what oil is good for you is coconut oil, not the corn oil that they told us we should have. And so no wonder it's so confusing when a person has a brain like I do, where you remember almost every single thing, or you have files after files of how it used to be and how it changes and how it's coming. Things change as research is done. Unfortunately, nowadays we're into the time where sometimes people falsify research or they misconstrue the results of the research. And so it makes it even more difficult to keep it straight.
Yeah, strange bedfellows, that's for sure. The book is The Anger Cure. It's a step-by-step program to reduce anger, rage, negativity, violence, and depression in your life. And, it's just really fascinating to go through here because you realize that you can be so empowered to take just real basic steps that you're going to feel better almost immediately. And, Kathleen, to give you an idea, I remember years ago when I was drinking milk, I went to what was known as a body talk specialist. Are you familiar with body talk?
A body talk?
Specialist.
Oh, no. Oh, yes.
And what this person does is they basically look and listen and get a feel for what your body's talking about. And she said something that your body's saying it really doesn't like you drinking milk very much. And the way it was saying it to me is that I kept having these stomach aches. And it was funny because the reason I was drinking milk was to get rid of those stomach aches or that pain.
Yeah. No, see?
And it was funny. She says, why don't you just go ahead and stop drinking milk for a day or two? And I said, that's funny you should say that because there was a point after I left my parents' house, they lived right across the street from a dairy where they got fresh whole milk. And what's in the store, of course, is much different than what I was used to getting then. And so really I more or less stopped taking milk altogether, and the only way I would get dairy would be through cheese, or it could be through, things like
which
that.
Is already pre-digested.
And it took about 2 or 3 days, but I noticed the stomach pain went away, and I really didn't need milk or drink milk in the first place. And eventually it just went away altogether. And I was just, very awestruck that here people go after something like, milk. They have it with their meal, for crying out loud. And you realize that, you're causing more problems than you're actually helping.
Oh, yeah.
So my question to you would be this, now that we're on the subject of milk, you're starting to see more and more on store shelves milk that's other than dairy. You've got almond milk, coconut milk, and the like. And I began to, and again, it's just something that I have, like maybe for recipes. I don't just sit and drink it anymore. What do you think about replacing dairy milk with milk like that?
Well, that sounds like a really good idea. And it's funny you say milk, because milk is one of those same things. Years ago, they thought that ulcers could be cured by shoving a hose down into someone's stomach and dropping milk on the sore.
Ooh.
Now we know that the acidity of milk creates the problem and can cause ulcers. You see how times change. If a person wants to have something other than dairy milk, they need to make sure it's unsweetened, because sometimes the non-dairy milk substitutes have so much sweetener in them, and I don't care what it comes from, that it can trigger you to want more sweet things and throw your blood sugar off. But there's no problem. Now I'm going to have a little confession here. I do drink dairy milk, and I have it in my tea. I have this one weird habit, and that is I like drinking tea in the morning. Black tea with milk in it. So old-fashioned and so English. But anyway, I probably drink a half gallon of milk every 2 or 3 weeks.
Well, see, there you go. You're not doing it every day.
No. Well, no, it takes that long for me to use it because I just put a smidgen in my tea. So, but I do take milk that has been, and I only take organic milk to start with, but a lot of times I have milk, like you say, made into cheese or yogurt when the sugar part and the proteins are broken down, so it's easier to digest.
And I can say this unequivocally, too, in using, for instance, coconut milk in recipes. In my opinion, it seems that it actually improves the recipe itself.
Oh, yeah. Many times it's true.
So if you're worried, folks, that, well, I'm going to go and make some biscuits, but it requires dairy milk, no, believe me, try coconut or almond milk, any of that, and you're going to find actually an improvement. It could be just me, but it seemed like it tasted lighter.
Yes, it probably does. Because, well, and of course the worst part is the calcium in dairy milk is almost impossible to absorb without the fat. And so when they give kids low-fat milk, they're pretty much giving them sugar that will, mainly just sugar, because milk has a lot of sugar in it. So they're giving them sugar and no fat, so they can't break down the calcium, they can't absorb the calcium. And, oh my gosh, I can't imagine giving a child low-fat milk. Adele Davis, my first teacher in nutrition, used to say that if you give a child skim milk, that's what we called it in those days, they could have all kinds of things like not exactly epilepsy, but convulsions from having milk, low-fat milk. So, then they become hyperactive, and then they put them on a drug. Oh dear.
Oh man.
So yeah. It's all very tricky, and we haven't even talked about the most evil thing, which is the genetically modified organisms that they are now changing our food into.
Well, we certainly have covered that many times here on the program.
Oh, I'm sure you would have.
And we started off with one of the biggest ones that you talked about earlier, and that's corn.
Oh, yeah. I only eat organic corn. I do not eat corn that is not organic. And now I actually found something where they were using purple corn, which sounds really fabulous. The blue corn is more natural and hasn't been hybridized. And so when people have blue corn, tortillas and so forth, it's not quite as bad as the yellow corn. But what they do to corn, it is not what your grandmother used to eat.
And believe me, if you really want to know more about that, folks, and you haven't, see the documentary King Corn. You'd be surprised at how many things corn permeates into, and a good portion of those are unrelated to food.
Oh, for sure.
They got to do something with those mountains they grow out there in Iowa.
Well, and it's funny because a lot of people that I'm on groups with on the internet are talking about something that's always in your food that's dangerous, and they're talking about soy.
Right.
And the soy that's been genetically modified is really hard on your body, but there's so much research that doesn't correspond with each other that it's very difficult to say whether soy is useful or not. But I can tell you that Henry Ford used to use soy. He was a soy freak, and he had huge banquets where he had nothing but food made out of soy. But he also used to spin it into the seat covers of the very first Model A's and Model T's. So, but that was real soy then. It wasn't so genetically altered as what we have now.
Mm-hmm.
But I suspect that a lot of people are having allergies and problems with pollution because they've had soy as a child in a formula that was so chemically altered that it caused problems in their body.
You know, and you have to think about all this put together, and you almost think that we've sort of created, and maybe unintentionally in some cases, but maybe intentionally in others, sort of an environment that we just poison ourselves, and you kind of wonder, you know, how did it get to that point?
Right. And I wish
I knew. And you can see why so many people are so angry. It really, again, isn't about the mind. These were very subtle things that were introduced over time that created a compound effect that eventually you just cap off the whole thing by saying, well, I heard this drug here will kind of tone down the depression or the anger, and it's like the icing on the cake.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I had a friend who was an insurance agent. He retired. He moved to another state and decided to become an insurance agent there. They gave him a test where he had to sit in a little room with a cubicle and have a handbook in front of him and an audio playing through a headset as his training. Well, he kept falling asleep every single day, and he was very furious. When he took the test, he only got 60% right. He was even more furious because, of course, he was super high IQ. So what we did is we put him on a diet with no carbohydrates during the day at all. And when he went in to do his studies and take his test, he never fell asleep. He got 100%, and he was the first person in the state to get 100% on the test for the insurance because he wasn't taking the carbohydrates that were making him fall asleep.
Now, carbohydrates, though, they do come in natural forms. Would it be the unnatural or more the processed carbohydrates that you're talking about?
No, it's
all of it in general. Then
it's the starch and the carbohydrates that are the starch. So it's interesting because when you eat grains, they turn to sugar in your body, and so a lot of people are totally against grains and what they do to you. However, then there are those who say that whole grains are better for you, and some say whole grains are worse. It's really hard to tell, and that's why you need to keep a log of what you do and what you eat and how you feel. And which I explain in the anger cure. And when you do that, you can see that if every Wednesday you get a headache because on Tuesday you went to a meeting and ate so-and-so, peanut butter, whatever it was, then you can say, oh my goodness, I see now that what I'm doing is causing my problem. And the best way to do that is to keep a lifestyle log.
Now, here was one that was really funny to come across because it seems to be the American way, especially for bowlers, and that is beer and pizza.
Oh yeah.
Those combinations have to go together.
Well, and it's really funny because in the early 80s when we first started to learn about the problem with yeast and candida in the body,
right.
A doctor in Florida was published an article saying he thinks that the reason there was so much trouble in the 60s and 70s with young people taking drugs, and this was in the 80s when he said it, is that a lifestyle of beer and pizza made them so low they had to get high.
Wow.
And beer and pizza, so bad for you. All that fat, all that grease, all that white flour, fruit and grains together causing trouble in your system, beer with all the yeast in it, and not to mention the alcohol. The alcohol is the better part of all of this, not the worst part. all of those things work together to stop your digestion, create a yeast problem, and make you sicker and sicker. So imagine beer and pizza or soft drinks and pizza being the cause of why the young people are so out of balance and taking drugs.
Now, because you brought up taking drugs, that's another thing that seems to be trying to get addressed, and that is the problem of addiction. Now, with these changes that you have here in the anger cure, with diet obviously being one of the big cornerstones to start, and you can see as you listen to this, folks, that it just makes a lot of sense. You know, the subtle things that you've done that cause your body's systems to basically get out of whack. Your digestion isn't working too well. You're just not processing food the way you should because it could be the kind of food that you're eating, the frequency or the regularity or how that you're eating it. We didn't even talk about chewing, for instance. But the fact is, how often would you say addiction to drugs occurs as a result of improper diet?
Oh, about 80% to 90%.
So do you find that when people begin to change things, to basically move in the right direction with their diet, that those addictions can fall away?
Oh, yes. You see, I don't believe that So, for example, I do not believe that nicotine is addictive. What is addictive is what it does to you. And what it does to you is raise your blood sugar so you don't have to eat and expand your lungs so that you can get more oxygen into your body.
Right.
And so I don't even believe that nicotine is addictive. Alcohol, the same. What does it do? It raises your blood sugar level, but eventually it knocks you out. And I just don't believe that most of the things people become addicted to, it's only what they're addicted to is what it does to them. And when you fix that, you won't have the addiction. You don't have to beat up the addiction. You don't have to do something to deprogram yourself. You just have to make sure you fix what it's trying to fix. Well, I know that's kind of fix what it's trying to fix. That's kind of weird. But if your problem is basic and you're taking some sort of addictive substance over and over, then why don't you fix what you're doing it for, not what you're doing?
And the reason I wanted to bring that up, Kathleen, it's interesting to have someone like you who is an expert with a tremendous amount of experience that you have. When it comes to addiction, for instance, alcoholism, that's one of the biggest addictions that there is, especially in America, is that how they treat addiction, to me, it doesn't really seem to really treat it. It's kind of like they're coming from a model that really isn't very effective. And I've addressed this here on the program more often, and are beginning to say, yes, the way they treat them at these alcohol addiction centers is so far off. It's just ridiculous because they put the problem as though there's some kind of almost birth defect that once you're an alcoholic, you're always an alcoholic. And I said, when they parrot that message, what would motivate anybody to want to quit?
Oh, yeah.
And my attitude has always been, you're an alcoholic if you drink alcohol. I don't care how little or how much you drink.
Yep.
When you stop drinking alcohol, you're no longer an alcoholic, period.
Right. Well, and of course what they're talking about is that not so much that, but they're assuming that because you're craving alcohol, that's the problem. But that's not the problem. You're craving alcohol to do something to your body. And if you fix that so you don't need the alcohol, you won't even want it. And the same with sugar and caffeine and nicotine and so forth. It's pretty simple stuff.
Now, Kathleen, for our listeners, could you give us a website people can find out more about this?
Well, they could go to my website, which is healthaliveproducts.com. I have some articles on there. I've decided to stop doing some of the supplements I was manufacturing, but you'll still see them on there. But you can read the information in the articles and the blogs and get some information that way. And of course the anger cure is really a good way to get the help you need.
Well, and there's no doubt as the listeners pick up this book, as I've discovered, it just seems to be filled with such reasonable information when you say, well, that just makes sense to me.
So let me give you a little funny story. Years ago, I did a radio interview on a station that had just started. And I was talking about doing nutrition counseling, and a woman called me and said she wanted to have nutrition counseling, so she wrote out her diet and sent it to me. Then I went to her house to talk to her, and the first thing I said to her is, I'm so surprised you're not an alcoholic by the way you eat. Mm-hmm. And her response was, I am. How did you know? But I joined a certain religious group, I won't mention it, where they have a buddy system, and that keeps me from drinking.
Oh, joy.
And I said, oh, my goodness, wouldn't you just rather not trigger it in yourself? But can you imagine her shock that I could tell by what she ate that she was an alcoholic?
Yeah, it makes you wonder what it was she was eating. Was it pizza?
No, well, not her, but no. It's funny, another fellow I met who was a friend of a friend, he was about to set up some kind of farm for alcoholics to go to dry out. And when he told me what he was going to feed them, I was horrified, and the first thing I said is, oh, my goodness, that's not fair. You're feeding them the food that's going to make them crave alcohol and then tell them they can't have it. That is just not right. And he said, what do you mean? What do you mean? We're just feeding them their food they usually have. I said, hello, of course. That's right. How they got there. It's, a lot of people have decided that this is not right. They do not want to hear me say this because they are so hooked on their lifestyle. They don't want to change, and they can't see, like you were talking about, if you make some simple changes, you won't have a problem. Mm-hmm. When I first gave up coffee a long time ago, and I used to drink a lot of it, I was a TV producer and a consumer reporter. And I was so afraid that if I didn't have coffee, I wouldn't even be able to function. And guess what? When I gave up coffee and got over the problem of what happens when you give up coffee, I was way more efficient. Mm-hmm. And so I understand that people are afraid to make a change because what's working for them as a status quo is okay. However, if they make some simple changes, just real simple, and the best one is to eat something within the first half hour of getting up, and then small, frequent meals, lots of veggies during the day, that will totally get people over most of what's wrong with the average person. Mm-hmm. Colds, flu, immune system problems, aches and pains, addictions, all of that will start to go.
Mm-hmm. I know one thing, too, Kathleen, I can even suggest to the listeners out there, to me, as I said, I like to start my day with green drinks. And you talk about something so simple, and if you're smoking a cigarette, I guarantee you have time for breakfast because the time that it takes you to make a green drink, you would be barely finished with half of your cigarette by the time you finish making the drink. So you have time to do this. But The funny thing is that as I started doing this, is that I just felt so much more empowered and, I guess, discretionary about what I put into my body. It's sort of like, are you really sure you want that? You know how you're going to feel after you have something like that. And what's interesting is when you're out driving through the day, especially if you're somebody who lives in town, and you see all of the fast food places that are out there, and this is actually something I've brought up on the program with others as well, and they found this to be an interesting point of view. Because we're out there and we're driving and we're in this perpetual state of anger, anxiety, stress, whichever word you want to use, either way, you're tense. You're tightened up, you're just kind of on the edge. That you'll pull into this fast food place because it's a quick way to at least temporarily relieve that symptom that you're feeling. But then you find the cycle again. You're back into the food crash. Eventually you'll feel a little bit better for a short period of time. Then you're back to where you are before, and it was Chun, who was this Korean in a movie called The Adventures of Remo Williams, says fast food is the fast way to the grave.
Oh, yeah, exactly. It's funny, I was...
Not that I don't enjoy a burger occasionally, and I'm very discernible about which of those fast food places I go to because of the way they taste, but There's a lot of truth to that.
A lot of times I say I love to eat that southern fried chicken. I really love it. And sometimes in a big year, I have it twice a year.
Mm-hmm.
And people say, what? Wait a minute, twice a year? Yeah, that's it. Because it's not so good for me. And then now it's come to the point where I don't even have it anymore, because when you do without something that's affecting you negatively, and then you have it again, you notice. Part of the problem is when a person's blood sugar is low, they can't tell if they're hungry, they can't tell right from wrong, they have no self-control. Mm-hmm. And if your blood sugar is up and down and is always dropping, you'll go into the quickest thing you can find to bring your blood sugar up, because you won't have self-control to go into a grocery store and buy a head of lettuce and eat it, or a salad bar. So, it's a vicious circle.
And I think, Kathleen, you've brought us to one of the most ultimate final points the anger cure makes in a very subtle way. And you'll discover this as you go through the book, as you take the test, as you apply the things that you talk about here in the book. And it's something that I find very, very lacking. Now, there was a marketing expert out there that I came across, a book of his, a Frenchman who actually goes and helps people to find out what the code of something is. And he's got a process that he goes about this. But in America, the code for food is energy. And when you think about how food is really marketed to Americans, there is no doubt that he is 100% right, that we look at his food as fuel, we look at it as energy. You even talk about that in your book. What you come to the conclusion of as you go through Kathleen O'Bannon's The Anger Cure is you start shifting to the way the French and the Europeans, their code for food is enjoyment and pleasure.
Oh, yeah.
When you begin to shift, just as you said, you loved fried chicken, southern fried chicken, but you loved having it once or twice a year. You got to a point, you cut it out to a point that you just don't want it anymore, and that's okay. But it's getting back to enjoying and taking pleasure in eating, and you can't achieve that eating a junk diet. You just can't.
No, exactly. It's most amazing that people don't realize that how they feel is directly related to the fuel they put in their body.
You really are what you eat.
Yep, that's it for sure.
So if you want to feel pleasure, eat pleasurably.
Yeah, can you imagine people just wolfing stuff down and stuffing themselves and then being all falling asleep and achy, and oh my goodness, I just can't imagine doing that.
I remember the late philosopher Alan Watts actually had a small little essay that he wrote. It was called Murder in the Kitchen. And he simply said, we seem to grow, prepare, and eat our food as though we hated it.
Oh, how funny. Yeah.
And it's so funny. Now, when you take a look at that, no wonder we're angry.
Yep. Oh, yeah, for sure.
Now, Kathleen, go ahead and give out that website again.
HealthAliveProducts.com.
HealthAliveProducts.com. The book is The Anger Cure. Again, it's a step-by-step program to reduce anger, rage, negativity, violence, and depression in your life. Our guest today, Ms. Kathleen O'Bannon. Kathleen, what a pleasure to have you here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Oh, thank you so much. It was so great to be here. And anytime, just give me a call anytime. I'd love to be on again.
Will do. We also want to thank you, the listeners out there, for joining us. Be sure to join us at our website, which is beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. We do have a free, wonderful weekly e-newsletter that we post. Comes out to you free every week. We'll also have hot links on our blog for the Anger Cure, so you can find out more about that and get that incorporated and find what it is to have that wonderful pleasure known as life incorporated into you. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you again for joining us. This is the Beyond 50 radio program. Remember, live your day past halfway.